All right, well, welcome to the GWT, Google Web Toolkit, and HTML5 session here at Google I/O. It'll be a fun time. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how to use HTML5 in GWT. So we're not going to have a lot of flashy demos, but we are going to have a lot of practical examples. I'm going to start off by taking you through an overview of what is HTML5, a very brief overview. And then we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about how to use local storage, and we're going to focus on local storage for performance. Then we're going to talk about Canvas and focusing on visualization. So no video games, but some practical stuff. We'll talk about using audio and video in your application, how you can enhance your app doing that. And then we're going to talk about drag and drop support, which is pretty cool. Finally, all the stuff we're going to talk about here, they're HTML5 features. They're not available in legacy browsers, so we'll talk about how to handle that. And then finally, I'll make some comments about CSS3 and how we're using that in GWT. All right, so some housekeeping. If you're using Twitter, if you're tweeting, here's the tags. I don't tweet. I'm not really sure what these mean. But if they make sense to you, they make sense to you. Here's the link for feedback with the URL. I'll leave this up for a second. I think it's only available after the fact. And I would like to point out that the top link is for positive feedback. I'm glad you're laughing. This is as good as it gets, guys. All right, so an overview. First of all, I'm John Labanca. If you're active on our forums, you may, when I'm not busy, you'll see me replying to some email threads and stuff like that. I've been at Google for 5 years on the GWT team, and so that's kind of a long time, and it's long enough to see a huge transition in the way we do things. When I started, it was all about trying to get things to work on all different browsers, and that usually led to a least common denominator approach. So basically, we were well, we made it work. We'll leave it at that. Now that with HTML5, that's not such a big problem anymore. Things generally work pretty consistently. Now it's about trying to maximize using HTML5 to its full potential. So what are you going to expect? Like I said, lots of demos, practical examples of how to use this stuff, and lots of code examples. So by the end of this, you should know how to go out and add some of these HTML5 features to your GWT app. All right, so what is HTML5? You may have seen slides like this 1,000 times. It's basically these media-rich DOM elements, audio, video, stuff like that. A lot of useful new APIs, and we're going to talk about some of those. And we bundle CSS3 into the HTML5 theme. So support is increasing very rapidly. Even though some legacy browsers don't support HTML5 features, the number of people on those legacy browsers is rapidly declining. And if you use HTML5, you can have one of these sexy apps that really stand out in the crowd. All right, local storage. We're going to talk about that. Now, local storage, you'll see every time we switch topics, I have the columns on the right, which are not icons for trademark reasons, so they're these ugly text, but supported on all browsers, including IE8. So this is pretty widely supported. And the first question I asked when I started looking into this is, well, why not just use cookies? And as it turns out, there's a very good reason. Cookies are part of the HTTP protocol, not part of the client protocol. And so every single cookie is sent with every single request to the server, or almost every request. And as you can see here, as we're sending RPC requests, we have a list of tasks. It's a list of data we want to save. And it's going to the server every single time. And in a bandwidth-constrained environment, let's say a mobile device, that's probably not what you want. So local storage, on the other hand, gives you much more data, and it's shared between browser windows. It's designed to be able to save in one browser window and load it in another. So how do you do it in Google Web Toolkit? Pretty straightforward. If you want to save an item, you get the local storage implementation that you want to use. You check if it's null. I'll get to that in 1 second. And you just set a string value pair, a key value pair of strings. Well, we'll get into more later about what partial support means, but in general, you'll see that because storage is not supported on all browsers, you have to actually check if it's null before you use it. Getting an item, the same thing, get storage, you pass the key, you get the value out. OK, so key value pairs of strings, that kind of sounds like a string map. And as it turns out, GWT does provide a storage map implementation, which is a Java util map, and it's very useful if you're used to that interface. What's cool about this is that the code was contributed by somebody named Bart Hoyt. Sorry. Who up until Monday, when I actually met him, I pronounced it Bart Gwit because that just sounded better for our team. Our external community is very active, and a lot of our contributions, a lot of the things that are in GWT started from the external community. So if you have something that you think is useful and you can genericize it, set up a code site project or send it to us, and we're happy to incorporate it into GWT. All right, how do we use local storage? The way we're going to use it in this example is to improve performance. And if you think about your traditional app, your Google Web Toolkit app, you load your app, you load the UI frame, and then in step 2, you send a RPC request for the data to populate it, wait for that to come back, and then push the data into the view. That RPC request could be kind of heavy. It could take a while. If we use local storage, though, we can create our GWT app and immediately go to local storage for some cached data to show on the page. Now, of course, that data is going to be a little bit stale, but depending on how your app is designed, that might be OK, especially if the data is specific to the current user. We then push the local data to the view and then send our RP request, basically at the same time, and we update the data once it's available. All right, so a demo. So here we have the Cloud Task Ultra Awesome with CSS3 rounded transition stuff. GWT app. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh the app. And if you notice, my tasks take a half a second to come in. But that's not good enough for me. What I want to do, now I have storage turned on, I'm going to refresh, and the apps are there immediately. What's happening is we're loading the task from local storage, and then the reason it keeps spinning, we are sending the RPC request. So you immediately see the task. It's instantaneous. And then eventually the RPC comes back, and we just repopulate the list with any updates. All right. I don't have a demo for this, but obviously local storage is also useful for the improving the user experience. So if you think about what Gmail does and a lot of other apps, as you're typing stuff in, it saves to the server. Well, if you lose your network connection, that doesn't help you. So you can also save to local storage, and that way if a user, if their computer dies, you can come back to it. All right, so now we've seen performance. What about just making things look better using Canvas? And I'm going to focus entirely on visualizations here because that's the type of app we're targeting, is these business logic apps. OK, this slide is boring, as denoted by the bullet point. And the key here is that when you look at this table, that you don't know what's important. It seems like no due date, a task with no due date, is the most important thing because it has a 6 next to it. But if we switch that out with a canvas, a very simple visualization, we can see that a large portion of our data is red, which probably means that it's bad. And that no due date actually turns out that it's grayed out. It probably doesn't matter. So visualizations can really bring out data. And now, I'm going to do a demo. OK, watch this. Ready? It's going to happen fast. No visualization? Visualization. All right? But what you can see, what we did here is we used up space that was unused. And in doing so, we added kind of a lot of data. This list on its own means nothing, but this means a lot. So let's say I want to call my mom, and I say, you know what? I'm going to edit that, and I'm going to push the due date out later because I don't call her enough. And I click done. And well, there's a lot of tasks, but it did update. Oh, there it goes. All right, so it updated. It updated after it re-requested the task from the server. OK. So now we have Canvas. So how do we actually use a Canvas in GWT? When I have never used Canvas before. It took me about an hour to create that chart. I'm not saying that it's super cool, but if you want to create a custom chart, don't be afraid. It's very easy to do with Canvas. Having done it once, I think I could probably do it again in 20 minutes. And so what I'm going to walk you through, we're basically going to create this. If you have a half pie chart's worth of data, you'll want to pay close attention to these slides. There's basically 4 steps to a canvas. You initialize the canvas. You calculate the values for the new shapes. Clear the current canvas if you need to. And then you draw the new shape. So here's the code. the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a canvas widget, and we're going to set two things, the coordinate space and the pixel size. If you haven't heard this already, some other talks mentioned it, but it is important. You draw to a virtual, if you will, coordinate space, and then the DOM, or the pixel size, is what you actually see. The browser scales the canvas up to that size. The reason that is really important is if your canvas resizes with the window, you don't want to redraw it every single time. Let the browser figure that out. So we calculate our positions and stuff like that. We do that based on the coordinate space. Here we're getting the radius and the center coordinates. We clear the canvas, pretty straightforward. And then finally, we draw that half arc. And this code, you can read through it and sort of see what it's doing. It's drawing an arc and it's filling it. But this stuff doesn't necessarily need to make sense to you in this context, because if you want to draw any shape, you can basically use, you can see the name is down there. It's called Google. You could just search for any shape you want to draw on canvas, and you'll find a code snippet to draw it. So this is a semicircle. It's probably the wrong way to do it because I'm not a canvas expert. But you can go up online and find more patterns to follow. So getting back to the coordinate space, what does it really mean? At the bottom of the screen, you can see what happens if we draw into a 300 by 300 DOM. That's the size of the canvas in our demo. You can see what happens if we use a 300 by 300 coordinate space versus 30 by 30. Obviously, the higher coordinate space is better. And so, but it comes at a cost. A large coordinate space, going to be higher quality, but it's slower to render. So if you only have one visualization in your app, go ahead and use a large coordinate space. But if you have a lot of them, or you're refreshing them rapidly, you're going to want to match the coordinate space to the DOM size. And you can do that in one of two ways. You can set the DOM size. That's what we did in the demo. We set it to 300 pixels. Or you can catch resize events, such as window resize events, and adjust the DOM size accordingly. All right, now into more fun stuff. Audio, I think, is one of the least utilized parts of the web, one of the least utilized senses on the web. And the new HTML5 audio widget or element allows you to embed audio. And you have to think of it, it's really two things. It is a widget or an element, and it's also an API for playing audio. You can call play, pause, stuff like that. It's designed primarily for use, I should say it was primarily thought of as a way to stream music. But in this example, I'm going to show you how to just play a simple soundbite in an application. All right, so here's a demo. So let's say I want to create a new task. And I come here and I say, call Dad, because I don't call him often enough either. And I set a due date, and then I click Done. And did you all hear that? Yeah, neither did I. Oh, there we go. OK. I will point out that the delay was not because of the HTML5. It's because it took that long for the request to go to the server and come back, because they gave all of you guys network-connected devices. OK. But why sound bites? Well, I think that there is a market. There are a lot of people who use streaming audio, and I certainly think there's a lot of use for that. But I also think that adding sound to your app can really enhance your app. I mean, I think it's totally underutilized. And if you think about just the ability to alert somebody when the app isn't in the focus, is the way like chat and stuff like that works. That's just an awesome thing to add to your application. So audio, as you can see here, browser vendors sort of disagree on which is the best format. And so you can choose, you must choose at least 2 of the 3 main formats. Which you choose is entirely up to you, but choose. And in HTML, this is how we create an audio element. Basically, the spec understands that the browser vendors are still discussing this. And so there is a way to specify multiple source files, and the browser will choose the best one. But here's something that's really important. The type, you have to specify the type, or the browser will download all of the source files. And the reason for that is you can't necessarily infer the type from the file name. The file name could be something like file ID equals 8210. And so specify the type. It will allow the browser to make a smarter decision. So in GWT, we create our audio widget. It is a widget. You can attach it to the page. and we add 3 sources to it. And you can see we're using we've static typed the types. So we add our 3 sources. Optionally, you can set controls. Actually, I can catch up. You can set controls and return the audio. Very straightforward, very easy to do. OK. Now, with that sound clip, even though it took a delay for the RPC request to come back, you'll have to take my word for it that as soon as we knew we wanted to play the sound, we were able to play the sound. And so the, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I showed you on this slide how to let the browser download files for you and figure out which file to download. The problem is not all browsers are super intelligent about how they do this. They may download all the files anyway, which is probably OK for a small sound clip. But if you have a large sound clip or a very large file, you want to be very sure that you only download 1 file. So you can manually choose which file you want to download. And to do that, you ask the browser, can you play this type? And it responds, probably, maybe, or empty string, as you might expect. And so here's what we can do. We can replace that part in the center, the add source, with a bunch of if-else statements, where first we take all our files that our file paths and say, or our types, and say, can you play this? And if the browser says probably, we probably want to use that file. If nothing says probably, we go through again and say, can you maybe play this type? And then if you maybe can play this type, then we play it. We don't need to check the no's because you don't need to. I will say that in practice, the browsers seem to return maybe if they can play it or no. I have yet to see the browser return probably. So keep that in mind. Don't skip out on the maybes. OK. Now, go back to what I was trying to say, and I skipped ahead. Our sound file played immediately after our RPC call came back and said that there was a validation error. So we can preload. Now, we can let the browser decide when to preload, the set preload. But the only arguments are auto and no. And so the problem, so this could be useful if this is what you want. And I believe the browser might preload when you actually attach the audio to the page. But if you want to guarantee that you preload the file, use audio.load. What we did in the demo is when the user went to the edit view, we call audio.load to make sure we've got that file. And then when the violation error comes back, then we just play it. OK. We talked about audio. What about video? Oh, look. Can you guys see that? All right, well, let's pretend it's some dark, shadowy figure. So you can embed video. There's not a whole lot to say here. It's basically the same as audio, except with video. And I do have a demo of that as well. Let me go to the task list. OK, let's say I'm using my application. And I'll preface this by saying there are a lot of uses for video. I'm not going to get into them. But the one I like is video tutorials, because I see that a lot with Google applications, and it seems to work. It's a lot better than just reading through a bunch of text. So here, let's say I don't know how to add a task. So I'm going to click on my video tutorial.
Tech support, this is John. Oh, you again.
Hey, John. I'm here at Google I/O, and I'm trying to create a task, but I'm not sure how to do it.
Seriously?
Yeah, you think you can help me out?
Did you try clicking the button in the menu?
Which menu? Which button?
The one in the menu.
This menu?
The other menu, on the left.
Your left or my left?
Right there. That way.
OK, but there's 2 buttons.
Seriously? You want to add a task, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So maybe the button that says Add Task?
Oh, yeah, that worked. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Is there anything else I can help you with? No? Good.
OK. So, I wouldn't necessarily do that in your own companies. That may not be the most effective use of your time. But at Google, that kind of stuff flies. But you know, that is basically that. I recorded that off my laptop. So it's very easy to record videos. except it's not always easy to know which encoding to use. So like audio, there's a little bit of a disagreement. They're still talking about this, about which files you can play on which browser. And so in this case, you can choose any two as long as one of them is MP4, because Internet Explorer and Safari currently only support MP4. Safari will play anything that QuickTime will play, but if you don't choose MP4, you're kind of taking your chances. Everything else about video is the same as audio. Create if supported, we add our files. You can do the same trick to choose a file manually if you want. And we set controls and return the video. So pretty straightforward. OK, now let's get into some cool stuff. Drag and drop. Drag and drop is obviously a newer HTML5 library, very powerful. It is supported in most browsers, but it is currently not supported in Opera. So keep that in mind if you want to have a fallback for Opera. And here's how it basically works. Again, we have our task list. We click on something, and we go to drag it. And there's a couple key features you'll note here. One is the thing we're dragging, we can actually make that or anything else appear beneath the cursor. And it's very easy to do that. The other thing is, so what does it really mean to drag something? You're going to click, and you're going to do a drag sequence, and then you're going to drop somewhere else. So you have draggable things, you have drop targets, and then you have all the events in between. And there's tons of events. There's drag start, drag end, drag move, drag enter, drag leave. And that means that you have tons of control over how you adjust your UI and things like that to show the user what they're actually doing. And one key point is that when we drag, we can save data that is persistent throughout the entire drag sequence. But what you really probably want to save is some unique ID. Don't create a huge JSON object and associate it with this drag sequence. Just set an ID, and on the drop, you can get that ID, and then you can get whatever data you need. Oh, and a demo. All right, so once again, now I know how to create a task. Once again, I'm going to click on something and drag it over and drop it. Pretty straightforward. OK. Wow. OK, so the first thing we need to do when we're dragging is make something draggable. And in order to make something draggable, we have to do a few things. We have to do all these things. They're not optional. First, we have to set the draggable attribute to true. On some elements, that's already set. But if you want to, say, drag a div element, you have to set its draggable attribute to true. You must add a drag start handler, or the browser will not know that the thing you're dragging is actually draggable. Sort of weird, but it's important. And then in Firefox, you have to set data. So make sure that and you will always want to. There's really no point in not setting data. But you do have to set data, or else the thing will not be draggable. OK, so let's walk through a simple example. Here we have our label. A label in GWT is a widget. It just shows text. It's just a div. And because it's not natively draggable, you have to call set draggable on that element. And as you can see here, it's not part of the widget API. So just if you're not familiar with it, you can go down to the element level, the div itself, and call this set draggable attribute. Then we add our drag start handler. Pretty straightforward. We have a drag handler, a method to add a drag handler. And the first thing we need to do is we set data. Now here, this takes two arguments. The first one is a string, which is like the key, but pretty much always has to be text. Apparently, you can set some other ones. But if you go too creative and say, like my ID, Internet Explorer will croak. So just say text. And then in that text, you can put a string. Here we put hello world. What you probably want to do is put a ID, a unique ID. And that data, that refers to the transfer data object. That's going to be persistent throughout the drag and drop sequence. This is cool. So this is optional. You can set what appears behind the cursor while you're dragging. And you can also specify its offset, whether you want it to be in the middle or not. And what we did here is we actually passed an element. The browser will take, effectively, a screenshot of that element at that time, and that's the image it uses. If you specify an image element, it will just download the image from the server. OK, so now we can drag something around our screen. Now we need a DL. We need a place to drop it, DZ. So we can to do that, we need to do two things. We need to add a drag over handler. We don't actually need to use it, but we do need to add it. And we also need to add a drop handler to actually say that we can drop on this target. So drag over handler. You can see what we're doing here. We're changing the background color. You can see in the demo the inputs change background color. You have to add this. You don't even have to actually change anything, but all browsers seem to require this. And then we add our drop handler. You probably want to prevent the default. And here's what happens if you don't. On most browsers, it will be fine. But if the user selects text and drags the text along with the draggable thing and then releases inside of an input element, what will end up happening is you'll get the drop event, do whatever you plan to do, and then additionally, it will copy and paste the text as part of the browser's normal handling of that. So you probably want to prevent default on these events. And then the last thing we do, which is the sort of culmination of this drag and drop sequence, is we're going to get our data out of the data transfer object, out of the event, and that data is the same data that we set in our drag start. Okay, now not all GWT widgets support the has drag handlers and stuff like that. So this trick is something that you can do for any DOM event, which includes click, mouse, mouse events, click events, keyboard events, all the native stuff. You can add a DOM, you can call widget.addDOMHandler and add that handler. And it basically takes one extra argument. It takes the event type, and as you can see here, it's just a static getter. Okay, so we walked through a few different HTML5 libraries and features and how to use them in GWT. Now we're going to talk about how do you handle browsers that don't support these features. Okay. Unlike most GWT APIs up until this point, we used to take a least common denominator approach, which basically means we would make it work consistently, theoretically, consistently across all browsers. With these new HTML5 libraries, doing that in many cases would be impossible or very, very difficult and a waste of time. So what we've done instead is we've created the APIs and let you check if they're supported. And so all these libraries have two static methods, is supported and some variation of create if supported. And so using those, you can check, one returns a Boolean and one returns the object or null. You can fall back to one of these three recipes. Do nothing, disable the feature, or fall back to another implementation like Flash, or suggest that the user upgrade to a newer browser, or just tell them to upgrade to Chrome. Okay, so here we created our canvas. We check if our canvas is null, and if it is null, we're going to create an image out of the data. So we're assuming here that there is some image URL API, which would allow us to create an image URL out of the data. What if we want to disable the feature? Well, then we set canvas to null, and we return. I hope everyone understands this code. It's pretty straightforward. It's more of a design decision than anything else. And finally, the upgrade to a newer browser / Chrome is awesome. OK, the last thing I want to talk about is CSS3. I only have one slide on this, but it's something to note. Up until this point, GWT has used, similar to all the APIs, we've used a minimal set of CSS and something that we could make it look identical across all browsers. We sent out a survey to some GWT users and asked them if we should use HTML5 in our latest theme, the clean GWT theme. And it was almost unanimous. Everyone said use HTML5 in browsers that support it and just have the other browsers fall back to something else. So here you can see where we used to have just a button, we now have buttons with rounded corners. But in older legacy browsers, those corners will be squared off. Going forward, we're going to leverage CSS3 even more. We'll use transitions, we'll use the new features, and so we'll make sure that they're usable in all the older browsers we support, all the way back to IE6, but we'll definitely leverage CSS3 where possible. Okay, so a recap. We talked about local storage and how you can use it to improve performance. Then we talked about using Canvas to create visualizations in GWT. We talked about audio and video. I showed you an example of drag and drop, and there are some gotchas that you need to be aware of. And then we did a brief overview on how CSS3 is going to be used in GWT. And of course, you have to check for support. So if you have any positive feedback, and really negative feedback is OK too, but I won't read it, just go to this link at the bottom. And if you want to try GWT, you can download GWT. The reason I pause every time I say GWT is because we call it GWT. And I was told not to do that. And so I have to think about it. Download GWT, but really GWT, from our homepage. And one thing to note is that GWT 2.4 just went into beta this week. But many of the things I talked about here were introduced in GWT 2.4. And the reason for that is because we thought a lot of it was done in 2.3, and then we built this demo and realized there were a lot of features to add. So if you want to try some of this stuff out, go download GWT 2.4. It should be very compatible with 2.3, and try out the code snippets from this presentation. I will mention that if you stay in this room for another apparently 30 minutes, I talk kind of fast. If you stay in this room, the next presentation in this room is High Performance GWT, where David Chandler is going to talk about some really cool optimizations, really obscure things that can have a significant impact on your application. And I will be talking, I'll have a short snippet on cell tables, so you'll definitely want to stay for that. And that's it. This presentation went kind of quick. The timer is already only at 28 minutes. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. Go ahead. Location, geolocation? OK, so the question was, what about geolocation for HTML5? And so far, these are the only HTML5 libraries that we've added to GWT. But we do plan on to continue to add more in the future. Like always, so the follow-up question is, what about a roadmap? And the answer is, we generally don't put out a roadmap because we'd go off-road every 2 months. And if you've ever talked to us, you can see that we have a lot of plans, and then like 3 months later, we switch around. The reason for that was, we have to stay pretty dynamic. Our things that we're working on change rapidly. But hopefully, we'll be able to get those things in. We'll continuously add some of these APIs and stuff. So, yes? Say it again? Oh, can you guys, I'll repeat your question, but if you have any more questions, stand at the mic so that they can get it on the audio and the video system. But the question is, when will GWT support WebGL? And the answer to that is, again, same thing. We're working on these things. I wish I had a better answer, but we're working on them. The thing with WebGL and like WebSockets and stuff is we don't want to introduce APIs too early before they're sort of at least usable across the main browsers. So we are not in a huge rush to add WebGL. So go ahead.
Hi, when will you support drag and drop for cell table?
OK, so the drag and drop example in here was actually a cell list.
OK.
And so there is a way to do it. Basically, the cell itself can say, I want to handle the drag start event, and it will be draggable. Okay. For cell table, it's a little different. And so I will work on that maybe in Q3, just as a proof of concept. But I did try that first. And I got it to the point you can play around with it. The cell can take drag start events. And because you can associate with an ID, I was able to get it to the point where you could drag it into like a spreadsheet and drop it into the spreadsheet, and it would copy it over. Yep. The problem is that doesn't seem to work on all browsers. Okay. It seems some browsers, I think their security model sandboxes you from doing that. And so it's something that we'll be playing around with.
You could, if it's all internal to the same cell table, we could probably figure out a way to do it. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. The cells can they can sync
just set all the
drag start events.
And handlers, and it should be okay.
Yeah.
All right.
General question about geometry. I haven't used GWT. Have used Java. Does it support affine transform, general 2D rotation, scaling, that type of class?
In CSS3?
GWT compiles Java into JavaScript, so I'm wondering what coverage it has for example, the affine transformation class. That's 2D rotation, scaling, skewing, etc. Arbitrary two-dimensional raster transformations.
I'm not familiar. Is this the WebGL or is this the CSS? I'm not familiar with it, I guess. It's CSS. Anything you can do in CSS, you can do in GWT. We don't. I mean, you still have CSS files in GWT. So you can do transformations, you can do rotations, if that's what of divs and stuff like that. We don't, so yeah, I mean, you can do all that stuff in GWT. We don't have an API around the stuff that you can do in CSS.
Are you asking about a specific existing Java physics library?
This is about Java, not about CSS.
Okay.
GWT translates Java.
The general answer is lots of people have ported existing Java libraries of various kinds for geometries and physics to GWT. If you look online, I don't remember where, you'll find what the limitations of our Java emulation are. But most of the gaming demonstrations and so on that have happened have been because of porting existing Java libraries to GWT without too much effort.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll introduce, Ray Ryan is our project leader for everything that we work on.
That's not true, but thank you.
Okay. Something like that. I don't get the titles right, but okay. Anyone? Oh, go ahead.
Real quick question on the audio files in local storage. Is it possible to load those audio files into local storage and then call them from local storage?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Well, what? Yeah, there is a file API that you can use. I only learned about the file API in another session, but there is a file API that you can use to save data. One of the problems with local storage, or one of the restraints, is that it's limited to 5 megabytes unless you install the app from the Chrome store. So you might fill that up a little, kind of quickly with audio files. But look into the file API. All right.
I have one question on Canvas. And we use the Canvas library a lot in GWT even before 2.2. At that time, I think for IE6, that Canvas use VML. I just want to know this. I saw you have a new API called Canvas, Get Canvas is supported. Just wondering for IE6, will that return now or it will return VML implementation?
We're not going to, so Canvas is only supported on IE8 and newer versions, and so we don't support the SVG versions. We did, there was an experimental project where we created an SVG layer on top of Canvas, so you can use SVG, or one way or the other, so you could use SVG across it, but the performance was so bad on the non-SVG browsers that we kind of abandoned it. So in IE6, you'll have to fall back to something else like Flash or an image.
Is the drag and drop support also HTML5, and do we go through the same API to test for support, or?
The drag and drop support, it's an HTML5 feature, and basically what it is, it's events. So if you have to set some attributes, but essentially you add a drag start event to an element, and so you know when it starts dragging. You add a drop event, so it's a bunch of events, and they're in GWT 2.3. But you'll definitely want, if you drag and drop in particular, you'll want to upgrade to GWT 2.4 if you plan to use those a lot, because the 2.3 had a couple bugs that we fixed in 2.4. So. Go ahead.
Are there any incompatibilities in the jar files for 2.4 that's not in 2.3 or 2.2? I downloaded 2.4 and ran into some problems with some jar files that I imported. And I didn't know, I went online and looked, and they said that there were some incompatibilities with certain jar files with 2.4, but they said you guys were working on it. This was online. I didn't know if there was still any resolved issues, or you heard of anything regarding that. I don't remember the exact jar files. I wish I could tell you, but it was a few weeks ago, and I forgot, but I just wanted to find out.
I'm not sure what the status is. It could be a Java 1.6, 1.5 thing. I'm not sure what the status of that is. Okay. I'll have to find out.
Okay.
Yes, just a quick question regarding Canvas. So when you resize the browser window and you want to resize the actual number of pixels on the canvas, do you actually have to redraw all the primitives in there? And is there an efficient way of caching that, or you actually have to keep them yourself and redraw them all?
You do have to, well, there's a lot of different options. So one is you have to basically redraw the canvas, but it will automatically scale. So if you set your coordinate space to something large enough that to handle whatever size you go to, then when you shrink, it will scale down, and when you expand, it will scale up. The only problem with that is if you're refreshing your canvas and it's usually pretty small, then you're going to get lower performance because you're drawing like a 1,000 pixel coordinate space into a 300 pixel canvas. But if you're just drawing it once, or you only refresh it very infrequently, then it's probably safe to just use a larger canvas. So, thanks. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you all of you for coming and staying till the end of the questions.